This is the third part of a trilogy of films that look at the tectonic history of the inner part of the Alps, as recorded by spectacular metamorphic rocks and unravelled by doing some structural geology in some stunning locations. So we're off to the northwestern corner of the Alps. Well, mountain ranges certainly make for spectacular landscapes, but they also are important records of tectonic processes. Now, of course, the obvious feature of mountain ranges is their elevation and the fact that they've brought rocks that once formed below sea level up to elevations that we can see them today in the mountains. But there's greater vertical movements recorded, in fact, by the rocks that I'm sat on here. These are metamorphic rocks that achieved their mineralogy at least 60 or 70 kilometres down in the earth, and here they are now, 3 kilometres above sea level, exposed to erosional processes. Well, how did they come to get to the earth's surface? It's tempting to think that just erosion, the action of the glaciers around here, have taken the material off the top, exposing these once deeply buried orogenic roots at the surface. But actually it's more interesting than that. These rocks came up during the tectonics that made the mountains. And that's what this film is about, trying to unravel the tectonic processes by which metamorphic rocks return to the Earth's surface during active mountain building. So let's see what we can find in these areas around here in the Italian Alps. Let's focus on this idea, the subduction channel model. The edge of a continent is taken into a subduction zone, descending into the upper mantle. This can be charted by metamorphism, the growth of new minerals. But the buoyancy of this subducted crust eventually forces it back up the subduction zone as a plug or slug of rocks. So once rocks are deeply subducted, the buoyancy forces can drive extra tectonics, even without any further convergence across the plate boundary. And the evidence for this comes from integrating metamorphic geology, structural geology, and geochronology. And the structure we need to establish are kinematics, because if slabs or slugs of rock return up the subduction zone, they'll have rather particular kinematics. And these are recorded as small-scale structures in sheared rocks. So we're on some pretty classic ground. The inspiration for Émile Argan and his understanding of mountain building processes, formed by huge lateral compressions, stacking and thickening the continental crust. Ideas that could be traced a century later to versions like this, converging continental blocks, the Alpine chain squeezed in the middle, rocks thrust over each other towards the European side, that's on the left. This traditional model of remorseless convergence is inferred from cross-sections like this. A remnant of the overriding crustal block, the lid of the Alps, with the stacked European rocks below. So this is the traditional kinematic understanding. We'll focus around this once deep portion of European crust, Mon Roa, one of the so-called internal basement massifs. And this is the heart of the chain. And this is the Mon Roa Massif at outcrop, continental crust. With all the diversity you'd expect, old granite sheets in even older gneisses. A varied set of continental rocks. Well, the dark rocks, the metabasic components within these gneisses, show really characteristic assemblages of so-called high-pressure rocks. These are eclogites, and they've got a dark mineral in this, which is the blue amphibole glaucophane, and sprinkled around the little green flakes in this are the mineral ophiolite, and they're also little garnets sprinkled around in here, so eclogite assemblages. So what conditions did these crystallize under? So we'll plot temperature increasing to the right against pressure increasing downwards, so pressure tracks depth in the earth. Carbon near the Earth's surface is stable as graphite, but deeper down it forms diamond, and similarly silica changes from quartz to coesite, calcium carbonate from calcite to aragonite. These are simple polymorphs. But rocks with more complex compositions than simply carbon, silica or calcium carbonate react to create new metamorphic minerals like these. And these provide more information on the pressure and temperature conditions that rocks experienced. So the mineral assemblage, if formed at the same time, that's in equilibrium, narrow down this plot. And this is where the gneisses at Mon Roa plot. So these rocks that we now find at the Earth's surface have come up from around 90 kilometres down in the Earth when their mineral assemblage was formed. So, deeply buried rocks. The Mon Roa Massif, European continental crust that's been essentially subducted down beneath the overriding plate. Let's see what lies on top, structurally, of these continental rocks. Mon Roa then has eclogite minerals, so-called high-pressure metamorphism. So let's go back and traverse up to its upper contact. These flaggy Mon Roa gneisses got a really excellent fabric, excellent lineation, stretching lineation of strung out minerals like this. So I'll just measure this and we can then use this to build up a kinematic picture. And the lineation's plunging down there to slightly north of northwest. So we've got a strong tectonic alignment in the Mon Roa basement. But up there to the top, about to get covered in mist, well, those green rocks, they're oceanic rocks. Let's go up and see if we can find the contact. These units are quite distinctive in the field, with a really abrupt tectonic contact. Oceanic rocks have been carried onto the continental crust, a process geologists call subduction. So let's get up to those oceanic rocks. So these metabasalts, they've got structure in them. These may even be flattened pillow lavas, and they've got lots of blue amphibole in this, so these have seen high pressure metamorphism. They've been subducted. It's not just metabasalts, but the Zermatt Sass zone has other components typical of oceanic crust. like these gabbros, now metamorphosed to eclogites. And although there are great outcrops in the mountains, there are also a few good ones in the valley bottom. Well, here are some nice fresh outcrops, aren't they? And these are the oceanic cover sediments. So this lot, these are marbles, so metamorphosed limestones. And there's some very micaceous vengetic schist here on top, and embedded in it there's these lumps of mafic material, and you can see this reaction rim on the side. There's more of that down in here as well, where we've got these green reaction rims with a mafic body just beneath in here against the carbonate or the mica schist. But they're more obvious, larger mafic sheets just along the outcrop. So here is our grey marble, and here in the green contact coming down like this is our mafic material, our metabasic rock. So almost all of this fabric in here is defined by aligned amphiboles. So at least some of these outcrops in the valley bottom are pretty good. Nice metasediments from the oceanic realm. The oceanic rocks show eclogite mineral assemblages, but it gets more extreme, as discussed in the first film in this trilogy. They also preserve high-pressure polymorphs of silica and carbon, the minerals coesite and microdiamond. So while Monte Rosa plots here, the Zermatt Sus rocks plot here. They were once a further 35 kilometres further down in the earth. Okay, back to the rocks. The contact down here between the oceanic crust and the continental crust, that contact, well, it's a bit odd, because if this is the original abduction contact here with ocean onto continent, where's the sedimentary cover to the continental rocks? It's a really puzzling contact. So let's see if we can make more sense of it if we continue our exploration around here and build up some more observations. The tectonic contact is really abrupt, and the shear fabrics retrogress the higher grade metamorphic minerals. These are strongly sheared rocks that portray a sense of movement along this tectonic contact and its top to the southeast. Back to our cross section. The Monte Rosa rocks have come back from around 90 kilometres down, but the Zermatt Sus from over 125 kilometres down in the earth. The tectonic contact that juxtaposes them operated at much shallower depths with this shear sense. And there's another unit outcropping, the Comban zone. It makes this landscape the different units. The Comban lies directly beneath the lid of the Alps, but above the eclogitic Zermatt Sus oceanic rocks. The Comban zone comprises metasediments and metabasalts that formed on the strongly rifted European margin. Now they're metamorphosed, but not in such extreme ways as the other rocks we've seen so far. These are classic green schist assemblages, epidote, chlorite and albite. So no evidence here for high pressure metamorphism. And above the Comban is the Dent Blanche nappe, which forms peaks like this, the Matterhorn. We visited the contact at the base of the Dent Blanche nappe and looked at its kinematics in the second film in this trilogy. The Dent Blanche has only experienced green schist metamorphism. So, there's a vast difference between the metamorphic grade of the Combin Dent Blanche couplet and the Zermatt Sass Monte Rosa rocks below. The idea generally established in Alpine literature is that the Combin zone and the Dent Blanche, the Alpine lid, had never been deeper in the earth than normal crustal depths, so they weren't subducted into the mantle. But actually, there are rare exceptions within the Combin that points to a slightly more extreme history, which place some of the Combin zone as having once been at around 50 kilometres down. So actually the Combin zone shows some variety, and it's been thinned down across a 20 kilometre depth range. But this is still substantially shallower than the Monte Rosa and Zermatt Sass. So let's put all of these estimates in terms of burial depths on our cross section. 90 kilometres for Monte Rosa, 125 for Zermatt Sass, just 30 kilometres for the Alpine lid of Dent Blanche, and up to around 50 kilometres for the Combin. So the big break in recorded burial depths happens at the base of the Combin zone, a major structure called by John Wheeler and I the Gressoney Shear Zone.
So a really great vantage point. Now we're up high, and we can use this viewpoint to get an idea of the continuity of some of those structural elements or tectonic elements. Most striking is that big white stripe that comes gently down the hillside opposite. And those are chiefly the Triassic marbles that represent the base of the Combin zone. So the Combin zone continues higher up to the peak there that's just getting encroached by cloud, which is the hill Grand Tourmaline. And those are continental margin rocks, lots of serpentinites and so forth. Beneath the white stripe, and that includes the rocks I'm sat on here, we've got rocks of the so-called Zermatt Sass zone. And these were once eclogites. Most of these rocks here are very strongly retrogressed. But these rocks have been deeply down the subduction zone, so we've got a view onto the major tectonic contact between relatively low grade and relatively high grade rocks in this area. Okay, well now we're up here, let's go and explore some of the outcrops. There's some just down here in the col. So, those pale rocks are correlated with the Triassic rocks of the European margin. They include dollostones, which are the Beja package up there, but they also include these rather dramatic white quartzites. These would be the equivalent of the Triassic quartzites of the European margin, and they're monolithic, really strongly deformed, really nice lineation in here, really good foliation as well.
The kinematics in these marnites has been determined for quartz crystallographic fabrics, and these indicate a top to the west-northwest shearing. But crossing these early marnitic fabrics are major extensional shears that show top to the east-southeast kinematics. So the Gressoney shear zone shows polyphase shear senses. First it moved top to the west-northwest, implying the Combin moving towards Europe relative to Zermatt Sass. But the later movement was top to the east-southeast, so Zermatt Sass is moving up relative to Europe. So, using the kinematics, the Combin zone exhumed first, followed by the Zermatt Sass. Right, let's get back to the rocks. And ask, what's the deformation in the compound zone itself? And we looked at this in the earlier films. Intense flattening in this carbonate conglomerate, and as deduced from folds also. So intense flattening in the compound zone associated with its exhumation.
Okay, well, so much for these rocks. Let's go down section now, down structure, into the Zermatt-Sass ultra high pressure rocks, but they're not eclogitic anymore. Well, these certainly aren't much to look at. Highly retrogressed ophiolitic material. It's all pretty much green schist facies now. Epidote chlorite fabrics, really highly deformed under green schist facies as part of the exhumation in the subduction channel.
Let's drop into the valley to see a great road cut, accessible for everyone to see.
Oh, wow. So, surprisingly, down in these valley areas, you do get some really excellent outcrops like this on some road cuttings. Fantastic rocks, aren't they? These are what you might call Opie calcites, so a reaction zone of mantle rocks, originally with seawater, metamorphosed, and then metamorphosed again. If you look really carefully in here, well, you can see, not that carefully, you can see these dark blobs, which are presumably pieces of original non-hydrated mantle rocks. If I look in the ground mass in here, I can see that the fabric that's folded, which is an early fabric, has little green streaks in it, which I'm pretty sure are omphacite. So high pressure pyroxenes, part of the high pressure subduction history in here. And then, of course, this banding is squashed like this and crenulated into these really spectacular crenulation seams, these really nice fold structures in these more carbonate layers that you can see standing out really nicely. So a retrogression, lower pressure deformation, almost at the green schist facies you can see in here, that's squashed this rock, thinned it down like this during the exhumation in the subduction channel. Great stuff.
So there's distributed deformation associated with the exhumation, the retrogression of the Zermatt-Sass. The same strain style in the compound zone and Zermatt-Sass. This is extensional flow. Let's put this structural story together. The major tectonic contacts were once thought to be thrusts stacking up Alpine naps, but the kinematics of the contacts show lots of top east-southeast shearing extensional senses accompanied by thinning or extensional flow in the rocks between the contacts. But our subduction channel model needs more information. Did this extensional flow happen in the channel, or is it entirely after mountain building? What about the timing? We can add age information on the cross section through here. The eclogites beneath the compound zone are dated at around 44 million years old, and the shears on top, which chart the return of the eclogites to relatively shallow depths, these have a whole range of dates. So exhumation took less than 10 million years. On a pressure temperature plot, it brings our story together. Exhumation rates of around a centimetre a year, or maybe even faster. Not only is this fast, the Alpine chain as we know it today, these mountains, were only just being formed around 35 million years ago. So the exhumation happened not after, but during Alpine orogenesis. So let's go back to the subduction channel model. In our idealized subduction channel model, crust is subducted into the upper mantle, forming high-pressure metamorphic minerals. Subduction is possible because the once buoyant rocks are strongly bonded to the dense subducting lithospheric slab. But as rocks warm up and metamorphose, these bonds weaken, allowing buoyancy forces to act. So this subducted crust portion can return, driving up the subduction channel, leaving behind a welded contact, mantle on mantle at depth. So this idealized view just shows a single flake, but the Alps have different flakes with different stories to tell. These went to different depths down the subduction zone. Monte Rosa continental crust, Zermatt Sass oceanic, some of the Combin continental margin, and they're all exhumed against the Alpine lid of Dent Blanche around these depths. But these different rocks were not in these relative positions in the subduction zone, and they didn't all come back at the same time. Originally, these different units were probably arranged like this, and they're now stacked up like this. We can deduce their stacking history using the kinematics. As in this idealized view, differing sides of exhuming slices have distinct shear sense, top to the northwest on the base, top to the southeast on top. So let's go back to our stack of slices. The Zermatt Sass Monte Rosa contact is top to the east-southeast, so Monte Rosa moved up relative to the Zermatt Sass. But hang on, Zermatt Sass was at a depth of 125 kilometres, that's deeper than Monte Rosa. So Zermatt Sass must have already left the great depths before Monte Rosa came up below it. And this is consistent with the late extensional shear on the Gressoney shear zone. The Zermatt Sass exhumed up the channel to ride up against the Combin zone. But the Combin was already high in the channel, as the Gressoney Kinematics early on was top to the west-northwest. So the first slice to reach high in the channel was the Combin zone, juxtaposed against the Alpine lid, followed by the Zermatt Sass, and finally the Monte Rosa. So, back to our cartoon with subduction. Zermatt Sass deep, the continental margin in blue never that deep. But Combin exhumes a bit, the Zermatt Sass in green more so, juxtaposed up against the Combin. Meanwhile, the Monte Rosa is descending deeper into the channel before riding back up, bulldozing and folding the earlier slices. All this shows the importance of integrating diverse observations and data when doing tectonics in mountain belts. So we're modifying the old ideas of simple nap tectonics, much more complex shear senses on the major tectonic contacts, what we might have called nap boundaries, and thinning within them. These betray the stacking of slices carried by buoyant return flow in the subduction channel. At outcrop, we just see part of this pile-up, but these flakes have choked off the subduction channel. Of course, plate convergence makes the subduction zone, but the buoyant return flow adds tectonic displacements within our mountain belt.
So this has been quite a story. We've been examining how metamorphic rocks have come up the subduction channel as it continues to evolve. And the implications are that once you have a subduction zone, it essentially becomes a motor for further orogenesis. The exhumation of deeply buried pieces of distal continental margin and ocean floor up against closer, more proximal parts of the continental margin, restacking that continental margin, restacking the edge of Europe. And that's the story of the Western Alps, driven by a subduction zone.